Hey, this is a spoiler review.
Welcome to the seasonal podcast. I'm Lane.
And I'm Holden. And this week, we're doing a short little bonus episode type of thing for the MCU review. This is kind of in the middle of stuff, but No Way Home came out recently as of the time of recording this, the new Spider-Man movie, and
2 months ago.
Yeah, recently enough. But I wanted to record a short little episode kind of talking about this a little bit because there was no way in hell that I could miss this movie.
Right.
Just a little bit of preamble. Avengers Endgame was obviously one of the biggest movies ever. Like,
I saw that opening night.
Yeah, and I still haven't seen that.
Which is surprising.
Yeah, but the main thing is that even in Avengers Endgame, I've been technically spoiled for a lot of key moments, but a lot of those moments don't really mean anything to me, like they're out of context or,
right.
Stuff like that. Stuff that isn't going to really matter to me that much until we get around to watching those movies later on in the MCU review. On the other hand, No Way Home was going to be impossible to avoid in a similar way to Endgame, but arguably harder. Yeah. Because of, at this point, obvious reasons.
Right.
And for me personally, because I was really hoping to see Andrew in this fucking movie, and because I knew that I wasn't going to be able to watch the movie until it came to theaters in our small town, which was a few weeks later than opening weekend.
Right.
When Lane and my other best friend Josh from across the country, who's appeared in a couple random videos that I think might be unlisted at this point, but they both watched it, I think, on the same day. If not, they were within a day of each other. And I asked both of them immediately after they got done watching the movie, is Andrew in it? Because I told myself, if I was going to be spoiled for this fucking movie, it was going to be on my own accord and not because of idiots on the internet. So I knew going in ahead of time that Toby and Andrew were in this. I should probably say spoilers, obviously, for anybody who hasn't watched.
This is going to be a spoiler type. I mean...
Yeah, obviously. So I'll probably, hey, this is a spoiler review. And I'll just cut that in later. You'll see that. But this is definitely going to be spoilers because it's just a quick discussion. But I knew going in when I watched it, because Lane watched it a second time in theaters with me.
Yeah.
I knew going in that Toby and Andrew were in it because that was all I cared to know. So avoiding story and plot details in terms of spoilers was easy, but avoiding Andrew and Toby being in there was going to be impossible.
That was hard to avoid, yeah. That's why I went when it came out.
Yeah, exactly. And I would have, but I just didn't have the ability to.
It was so nice seeing them come. When Andrew came on screen, because I didn't watch the Amazing Spider-Man movies. I grew up with, Tobey Spider-Man and the Amazing Spider-Man. Andrew Garfield just didn't interest me. So when Andrew came onto the screen first, I was like, cool, he's in it. Now where's Toby? Because at this point, I didn't know, if they were in the movie or not.
Oh, yeah?
And then when Ned opens up that second portal and Toby comes through, I did a little clap in the theater. I was clapping.
Yeah, and I mean, I think this, I don't know how it was for fans who didn't know that this was going to happen. Right. But I think it was a genius idea to have Andrew come in first because he's the one that people didn't care about or didn't like until after this movie. Fuck you, people.
I don't know why there's so many fans of him now. No, I don't dislike him. I just never watched the movie, so I never had an opinion.
Yeah, and that's fine. It's just that I think it was genius having Andrew come in first. So even though it didn't make as big of an impact on me, it made a bigger impact on the Spider-Man fans as a whole, because most people, even with Tom Holland's Spider-Man, Toby's most people's favorite, probably 70% of people who have watched all of the Spider-Man movies, Toby's the favorite. Yeah. So it was genius to have Andrew come on first, because that guaranteed that Toby was going to be in there.
Yeah.
To some extent. Plus the banter between
Ned. It would
Ned.
be kind of a letdown to have Andrew show up and then no Toby.
Exactly.
It would kind of be
and if Toby showed up first and they didn't have Andrew, there would have been a very small minority of people like me who would have been fucking pissed, but everybody else probably wouldn't have cared. They would have been well, they should have gotten Andrew too, to be fair. But so I think the way that they revealed it was genius. Plus Andrew's banter being a little bit closer in age and some action spectrum to Ned and MJ made a little bit more sense too to have him be the one that's just like
Toby's old, and he was old in this movie.
Dude, I discovered after watching this movie, Andrew Garfield's fucking like 38 or something like that.
Really?
That shocked me. So Toby's, you know, in his mid to late 40s.
Yeah.
But I didn't realize that Andrew's like in his mid to late 30s. I'm like, you're that fucking old? And he still looks like he's like in his late 20s maybe.
Right.
Andrew looks fantastic. Toby looked a lot better than I thought he would. Looks a lot different, but granted, that was 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Spider-Man, the first Sam Raimi Spider-Man movie came out in 2002.
Yeah.
So,
and those were the movies I grew up with. And that's why this movie was so good. I mean, the Amazing Spider-Man villains, I mean, they were great, but, you know, I really didn't have any context for them. Where I was just like, cool, they're in this movie. But seeing Doc Ock and Green Goblin and Sandman, I grew up with those villains. Yeah, it was...
And meanwhile, I'm on the completely other side of the spectrum because I watched and loved both of the Amazing Spider-Man movies. I haven't watched the original trilogy, the Sam Raimi ones, but I did order an 8-movie box set thing of all of the Spider-Man movies leading up to No Way Home, including Into the Spider-Verse. So at some point, I'm going to watch all those because you can watch.
Into the Spider-Verse is a good movie.
Yeah, and I've only heard like one person say a bad thing about it, and that was because the animation style gave them a headache, which fair enough.
Which, I mean, that's 100% fair.
But like, yeah, so I am a fan of the Amazing Spider-Man, and I just got to get this rant out of the way right now. Fucking everybody who now wants an Amazing Spider-Man 3, I'm glad. Look, I am very happy that Andrew is getting all the love that he deserved a decade ago. But where were y'all a decade ago when these fucking movies came out?
It wasn't exactly him as Spider-Man that was the issue. I just heard the movies weren't.
Well, the Amazing Spider-Man 1 is a very popular movie. A lot of people liked it. It had a good take on the Spider-Man origin story.
Right.
And a lot of people liked it. Like, I've seen, like, in a Discord that I'm part of, there are a lot of people who did rankings of all the Spider-Man movies after watching this one. And The Amazing Spider-Man frequently came above Spider-Man 3 and Far From Home. It's some above Homecoming. Like, some people just don't like the first two.
The one thing I like about this movie is, what the fuck's his name? Who's the Spider-Man now?
Tom
Holland. He's actually Spider-Man in this movie now. Because the last two movies, he's like this fucking kid that doesn't know... Well, I don't know how to word it. But
and
they're not Spider-Man... They're Spider-Man movies, but they're not Spider-Man movies.
Yeah, because they're arguably more MCU movies than they are Spider-Man movies.
And this is the first movie where he can now take off as Spider-Man and, you know,
exactly.
actually be Spider-Man.
And that in and of itself is a lot of the reason why this movie works
Tony
so
Stark's
well.
dick.
Yeah, basically. Especially with Tony being dead now and that kind of... Because I know that. Like...
Yeah.
It even mentions it in the movie. I'm pretty sure.
The movie takes place right after...
Far From Home. Far From Home takes place after Endgame. So, like I said, I know some of the spoilers from Endgame, but they don't really mean that much to me in context right now. I just knew that despite the fact that I hadn't watched MCU or I hadn't even watched Far From Home yet, because I watched Homecoming in theaters. And I enjoyed it then. But
I mean, it's not a horrible movie by any means.
No,
it
just
doesn't feel like a Spider-Man movie.
Yeah, I liked Homecoming enough because Tom Spider-Man is humorous, but he is very much a child compared to the other two. Tom Spider-Man is a high schooler. Yeah. Just now going into college with Ned and MJ in this movie, or attempting to. And... comparatively, I don't know what age. Is Tobey Spider-Man a high schooler in those movies?
In the first movie, he was a high schooler, yes. But I think like the second or third, it's been a while since I've watched him, but the second or third, he was living in his own apartment or whatnot. And
so...
couldn't like pay rent and all that, and, you know, that typical thing.
Yeah, fair enough. But Andrew Garfield Spider-Man was... I think he was always a college student. Maybe it was a high school. I don't remember for sure. It's been years since I watched that Amazing Spider-Man 1. I don't remember if he's a high school student or a college student, actually. I watched
Spider-Man 2 actually about a week before I went and saw No Way Home.
Oh, yeah, because Doc Ock?
Doc Ock, yes. He's probably my favorite villain, and the actor, I forgot his name, but he plays Doc Ock really, really well.
I don't know my favorite villain that appeared in this movie, but... The thing was, I think in a small way I got more out of this movie than you did in terms of references and jokes and stuff like that. Because I've watched the Amazing Spider-Man movies and you haven't. but basically everything that was referenced or joked on, played on from the original Spider-Man trilogy, I know of because of memes.
Well, yeah, there's the My Back one.
There's my back, and I'm something of a scientist myself. Like all of these jokes and references that are made for the original trilogy, most of them, if like obviously I don't know if I caught all of them, but I caught a half dozen or more jokes and references from the original trilogy just because of memes.
Right.
And then I also caught all of the references from the Amazing Spider-Man movies that you wouldn't have. So in a way, I think I caught more of that reference stuff. Right. References were so fucking good.
They were. Well,
there was
my favorite was... So the only part of an Amazing Spider-Man that I have seen, like I walked in to my grandparents while they were watching the ending of the Amazing Spider-Man 2 when he can't save his girlfriend. She kind of just goes, like, splat. And for me, that's funny because I'm not attached to those movies at all and didn't watch them. But when I walked in right as that happened, and I was like, "Fucking hey, that's funny." But in the movie, Far
Such
From
a bitch.
Far From Home, he saves MJ and got emotional about it, which for some reason got me emotional. I was like, "Good on you."
For some reason, that wasn't one of the scenes that I cried at, but it felt very good. Yeah. Unfortunately, that was the one thing that I was spoiled about before going into this movie. Was Andrew saves MJ from something. Yeah. That was the one thing that I was spoiled about that I was very upset about being spoiled. Because if I hadn't known that, that scene would have hit me harder than it did. Right. But because I knew that it was coming, and there was one other scene, but it still got me to cry anyway. But either way, all the references were great. I found myself very attached to all of the villains. It was all of them had very great plot wrap-ups. Even though I haven't seen the original trilogy, the way that their stories and arcs are wrapped up, introduced midway and wrapped up in this movie was great.
Take villains from different time periods, but in the same universe. Because it was a little weird, because Sandman even was like, Green Goblin died impaled by his own blade, and then a few years later, Doc Ock died in the river with his machine. And
I don't know how they justified that. I think it was
because even Doc Ock's like, well, Green Goblin died, a few years ago. How is he here right now?
Yeah. And I don't know. I think it's probably just
magic.
The idea of the multiverse in the first place, especially with Doctor Strange's magic.
Right.
And I gotta say, that's the only thing about this movie that I think is messy, is because I've not watched a single movie except for Infinity War that has Doctor Strange in it.
Doctor Strange's movie was really good.
So I don't know anything about his character,
He's probably my
but
favorite
his
character.
Willingness to just completely destroy the fabric of reality for a teenager who wants people to forget that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, which fair enough, it seems a little bit hasty to me. It seems a little bit weird. And that's the one frequent comment that I've seen is a lot of people are like, this doesn't make sense for his character. But then a lot of people have said, Doctor Strange is a very reckless person. So the idea that he's a very reckless person and would be reckless in the name of Tom Spider-Man may or may not make sense. Like it's kind of one of those hot button issues in the movie. But that's like the only major criticism that most people have, I think.
You can only fit so much into one movie, especially with this many characters and whatnot. Some parts are going to be rushed.
But yeah, exactly, and that was the only thing that felt weird or rushed was...
Unless you're willing to sit through a 6-7 hour movie to explain everything, some things are going to be... Well, I'm willing to sit through.
I'm surprised that this was only 2.5 hours and felt this good, having all this in it.
Was close to 3, wasn't it?
When most people said that this movie is only 2.5 hours long, I was like, really, this isn't 3 hours?
Yeah.
I was like, with how much they're going to have in this is going to be another Amazing Spider-Man 2/Spider-Man 3.
Yeah.
Because that was the reason the Amazing Spider-Man movies never got their third or fourth, because they were planning 4, was because the second one flopped for similar reasons as to why the third Spider-Man movie didn't do well. Tried to put too many enemies, too many villains into it, and just didn't complete anything.
Well, and to establish everything, it didn't seem like Toby and Andrew were in the movie for too long. They were in towards more the end of the movie.
Yeah, but no, they came in like 45 minutes in, though.
Really?
Yeah, it was like 45, 50 minutes in. It felt like the end of the
movie when they showed up. Like, because it was
I guess that's a testament to the quality. Like, the beginning is slow. The worst part of the movie is the beginning because it's a little bit slow getting into the multiverse.
They showed Daredevil. I don't know who Daredevil is, so I didn't have any reference to that, but there was a couple of people in the audience that cheered for him.
Yeah.
And I was like, who the fuck is this guy?
And the joke of him being, just catching the ball or whatever and saying I'm a really good lawyer is a brick. Yeah. It's just like I'm a really good lawyer was super funny because it makes no sense, but for some reason that line landed.
Right. Well, yeah, and the movie's slow with basically everyone hates Peter because, Mysterio lied or whatnot.
Yeah.
And he's framed for...
And I don't know much of this story stuff. Like, the whole beginning, like, the first, 2, 3, maybe 4 minutes of this movie doesn't make sense to me because I didn't watch Far From Home, and this picked up right at the end of that.
Yeah.
Presumably. Like, just based on context clues and stuff. But I do just want to go through kind of, some favorite moments and scenes and stuff.
Doc Ock showing up.
That was pretty cool.
The way... He's just a badass villain. The way he can just throw Spider-Man around with his forearms or whatnot. They did bring...
I loved everything with Tom's Spider-Man taking control of the arms and stuff. That was very good humor and a very good way to kind of balance the bridge scene.
Yeah.
Because of course his nanotechnology is going to be able to do kind of stuff like that. And the way that the nanotech would go to different parts of the suit. I didn't realize that was part of the tech of his suit because I don't think that appeared in the first Tom Holland Spider-Man movie.
Right.
So I was like, that's fucking sick. So I really liked that. Like you mentioned, the scene where Andrew saves MJ. Yep. That unfortunately didn't hit me as emotionally as it should have.
Right.
Just because I was already spoiled for it. But I will say that scene at the end of The Amazing Spider-Man 2 when Gwen dies.
Yeah.
One of probably a top 3, if not my most favorite scene in movie history. I've watched that movie 5 or 6 times. Every single time I cried. It's like the opening sequence to The Last of Us.
Yeah.
I have cried every single time in that scene. Same thing with Gwen's death.
I do like the reference to Miles Morales.
There is a reference with Jamie Foxx. Just like, man, I was hoping there would be a black Spider-Man.
Yeah, he's like, there's got to be one out there, right? Yes, there is. And I'm hoping they don't, since, Miles Morales has been known as like connected to the metaverse type thing with the movie and whatnot. I hope they do a thing.
Not the metaverse, multiverse.
Multiverse.
don't. Yeah.
Shut up. I forgot metaverse is like now.
Yeah, I know.
It's so.
They're trying to make it. Yeah, well, we don't need to get into that conversation.
But I hope they do what they did in the video game series. Bring Miles Morales in with like Tom Holland Spider-Man.
It would be kind of cool to see if they introduce a Miles Morales Spider-Man. Yeah. Especially since he's in.
Don't think they're going to be able to do the multiverse thing again.
It depends on what they do.
True.
I've heard one single rumor of something that I'm just like, yeah, that's not happening. But people can dream. I'm sure that Sony will want to do something with a multiverse idea. Like, even if it's not in the MCU, they'll probably... I would be surprised if...
The next movie coming out, Doctor Strange, Multiverse of Madness, there's a lot of speculation. And they're also talking about, how they're talking about Andrew Garfield's third movie?
A lot of people want that now.
Yeah, in the movie, he said he's been pulling back his punches, and they're saying he might, in this third movie, there's a rumor, he might be playing more of like a villain or anti-hero type of person, because he's not... Yeah.
I don't know. That doesn't make sense for Andrew Spider-Man, to be
going
honest.
into a deep depression and just being angry.
After Into the Multiverse, I don't know if that would make sense for the character.
It might be before. Maybe the movie. Maybe ends with him getting sucked into the.
True. Plus, the end of The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is a cliffhanger. So who knows where The Amazing Spider-Man 3 and 4 would have gone. I wish I got those movies. Because I gotta say, like I said, I'm glad that Andrew's getting all the love that he should have gotten a decade ago.
Right.
But I'm just going to say this. I was the one person who loved Andrew. I was the one person that wanted The Amazing Spider-Man 3. I was the one person that loved those movies. And like I said, I'm very glad that he's getting the love now.
Right.
But it almost sucks to be the one person who always wanted that, and now everybody wants it. It's just like... I was here for not a decade because I hadn't watched the movies back then, but probably since 2016 or something like that.
Right.
So the past 8 years or something. It's like, I've wanted that. So you can imagine how upset I was like 3 years ago or however many years ago when it was leaked that Andrew was going to be in a Spider-Man movie again. We didn't know what, but it was just the picture of them up on the Statue of Liberty scaffolding.
Right.
with the blue screen behind. And he was like, I'm telling you it's fake. It's photoshopped. And you can't blame him for having to lie. You can't admit something like that. And everybody's just like, okay. And everybody believed it. And I believed it. And I was really sad for many years because, like, I had watched those movies and was like, oh, I want Andrew to be Spider-Man again. He was so good. I like him more than Tom Holland. And I haven't watched Tobey, but I love Andrew. So a couple years ago, or a few years ago, rather, when those leaks came out and he outright denied everything, was just like, I will never be Spider-Man again, was basically what he said. Was like, I'm not playing Spider-Man again.
Right.
And I was really hurt by that. Not like personally hurt, but I was really sad. So this movie really made up for that.
Yeah.
It felt really good. I do want to mention the 2 scenes that I cried at. Did you cry when you watched this?
When Aunt May died.
Yes.
That got me emotional. She's hot. She didn't need to die.
Oh my god. No, that scene was very emotional.
I'm just glad they actually made Aunt May hot this, the 3rd time around. Because, like, the Aunt May and, like, the Tobey, see, like, the...
Oh, the Aunt May and the Tobey is...
She's an aunt.
She's the old aunt. I like Aunt May from the Amazing Spider-Man movies.
She's young?
She's not... She's in between.
Okay.
She doesn't have white hair. She's not old. But she's youngish.
Okay.
Like, she's maybe...
But, no, it was
late
emotional.
50s or
And she
something
was,
like that.
yeah. It was emotional.
Yes.
But Green Goblin,
Dude, Willem fucking Dafoe.
Yeah, Willem Dafoe.
Oh my god, his acting is so good. He went multiple times in this movie from being the coolest, like, chillest, calmest fucking person and could flip on a dime to just being this fucking lunatic that literally terrified
He played on his yes. I don't know if they played on that too much in the first one. I think they
did, but not to the extent that they did.
Because in the first movie, he became Green Goblin because he got kicked out of his own company or whatnot, and
he went crazy. It was the voice,
Yeah, but I hate that they destroyed his mask early on the way they did. I would have liked to see him in that mask again.
I mean, that makes sense. As someone who didn't watch the movies, I thought that it was kind of cool because you get to see his face. Because Willem Dafoe, like, this is no offense to Willem Dafoe, he has a weird looking face in the best way possible.
Right.
Because it allows him to look very, he looks very familial. Like, he's a family member. Like, he looks like somebody you just love, but can also look absolutely fucking insane. Just batshit crazy.
Yeah.
And he does so well playing those 2 different sides in this movie. I was like, look, Willem Dafoe's a good actor, but then I came out of this movie and I'm like, Willem Dafoe's one of my favorite actors just from this movie alone.
You need to watch the first Spider-Man.
I need to watch them. And since I have, PlayStations and stuff that can play Blu-ray, I can watch them on those, but still.
But that final scene where Tom Holland's beating the shit out of, Daniel Defoe.
Not Daniel Defoe. That's me.
I'm getting names mixed
Willem
up.
Dafoe.
Willem Dafoe.
With Defoe spelled different.
That was just pure violence.
That was a very cool scene, though, because especially with Tobey, because it was part of Tobey's Spider-Man that Spider-Man doesn't kill. Like, that was a specific thing in his movies, as I was made aware recently. So for him to stop Tom when Tom is just in his revenge, because...
In the first movie, he dies by his own glider. Tom Holland raising his glider to fucking kill him again. Tobey, I think that's why Tobey stepped in.
I didn't know that reference. Yeah. That's a pretty
Tobey's
good
like,
reference.
We're not repeating history here.
Yeah.
Let him go. And then, of course, he gets stabbed.
But part of it was also... Okay, so I first want to go back to that Aunt May scene, because there's a little bit to talk about. But the Aunt May dying, that was the start of me, like, getting really emotional.
Yeah.
But that carrying through for so long, up until, like, that made me almost cry.
Right.
Both of the other Spider-Men coming into the scene, and then them deciding, Tobey and Andrew saying, well, we have these places where we go to when we're upset. Yeah. These places that only we can go to. Does Tom have a place like that? And of course, it was cool to have it be the same place where he and MJ are talking at the top of the roof when it's revealed that, oh God, Peter's Spider-Man.
Right.
But when Tom freaks out and looks up and sees the other 2 Spider-Man, they come down. this scene, I cried like a fucking baby when they were talking about feeling like a failure.
Yeah.
This scene hit me so
Talking
hard
about their
because
things like Toby's Uncle Ben dying, Andrew,
Gwen dying,
Gwen
and
dying.
his Uncle Ben, but wasn't
And his
mentioned in the
Uncle
movie.
Ben, yeah.
But especially when it came around to him talking about Gwen being, she was my MJ, I was like, that fuck. Because, like I said, Gwen dying, every time I've watched The Amazing Spider-Man 2, that scene has made me cry. This scene with them, Andrew and Toby telling Tom, it's okay to feel like a failure. We've all had that.
Yeah.
You're not alone in failing to save someone you loved.
Yeah.
That scene made me cry so fucking hard.
It was a good scene, yeah. And then, there was something else I was thinking of.
The other scene where I cried was the other one that I was spoiled for, was that MJ loses her memory. I knew that MJ would lose her memory.
Yeah. Everyone.
But even though I knew that, I for some reason it didn't click in my head that was happening until like the moment that it was happening. I was like, oh no, this is when it happens. So Andrew saves MJ.
Yeah.
And that's really fucking sweet. Like, I really loved that moment. But then it goes into Tom being, no, I want them all to forget me. Yeah. Do this and save the world.
Yeah.
And I'm just like,
well, because if you didn't, did you see the cracks in the sky? They had almost the rhino come out from Andrew Garfield's.
I didn't see that, but I didn't like explicitly see it, but
that rhino almost coming through. There was a couple. I recognized them when I watched it, but I can't think of them now. They had a bunch of other.
Yeah, I'm sure there were a bunch of references there, but I wasn't paying attention.
Right. One thing that made me laugh cry was Doc Ock talking to Toby, saying, like, oh, you're all grown up. How have you been?
Oh, when fucking when Tom fixes Doc Ock, that was super cool.
Yeah.
I was like, damn. And it was, okay, in some ways it didn't make sense for some of those quote-unquote antidotes to work. But at the same time, I'm so willing to forgive it just because of the plot implications. Right. Just, like the last 40 minutes of this movie is them at the Statue of Liberty and healing all of these guys.
Jameson, right?
Yeah, J. Jonah Jameson.
They brought him into this movie, and
I don't like that he looks so different because of the hair and stuff. But he's an old guy now.
Because in the original trilogy, he's like, Toby was like, you need to trust more people. Or he's like, I trust my barber. In this movie, he's fucking bald.
Oh yeah,
which is funny.
That is funny because he looks weird, but I don't mind. It was cool that he was brought in.
I don't think he was in any other Spider-Man movies other than.
No, just his. There wasn't even a J. Jonah Jameson in either of these other two Spider-Man, just Toby's.
Yeah, and the fact
which is an interesting choice.
And they didn't even. He was in the movie at the beginning before they even, the multiverse was even opened up. So I was like, where has he been the last?
Yeah,
but with him being there, not without the multiverse being a thing, I'm hoping maybe in the next couple Spider-Mans with Tom Holland, he can maybe they'll just cross him over. Maybe he was a new crossover edition into this one just because they fucking could. Who knows? They had to bring him in as a reference because they don't have Stan Lee.
Oh man, that's so sad. It's so unfortunate that Stan Lee wasn't able to be in probably the best Spider-Man movie.
Yeah. I'm sure he knew it was going on though, and he was.
Oh no, he's looking down on it and very happy about it. But that actually reminds me from the Amazing Spider-Man 1, the Stan Lee cameo in that one is when Andrew and the Lizard are fighting in a library, and Stan Lee has got headphones on.
I've seen that on YouTube. I've seen the clip of Andrew fighting. Well, I don't know if he fought Rhinoceros because that's at the end of the movie, wasn't it?
He was right about. I don't remember. I think he might have fought him a little bit earlier in the movie. I don't remember for sure. I don't know why. But at the very end of the Amazing Spider-Man 2 is jumping right into fight scene, presumably where the third one would have picked up.
Right.
So a cliffhanger.
True. There was also
that is the textbook definition of a cliffhanger. But
when Toby says his relationship, they were talking. When all three of them are in that lab working together and they're talking about relationships.
Oh yeah.
Toby says it's complicated, and I was like, it's still complicated.
Oh, bro, it's always been complicated with them too.
In the movies, oh my god, it was awful. It was always complicated. But it's like with how old you are and how much time's passed, you'd think you maybe figured that out. But
yeah, true. But it was. so sad. And like I said, in the Amazing Spider-Man 1, the Stan Lee appearance in the library fight scene and the desk that barely misses him is super funny. There was a reference in this movie to that scene. I can't remember exactly what it was off the top of my head, but I remember watching the movie. I leaned over to you in the theater. I was like, that's a reference to his appearance to Stan Lee in Amazing Spider-Man 1. I leaned over several times to him and was just like, that's a reference from this scene in one of the Amazing Spider-Man movies, because there were a ton of them. It was nice to see Jamie Foxx. I'm very glad they did a very good thing in this, removing his blue skin. Because he looked stupid in The Amazing Spider-Man 2. I didn't hate the way he looked, but he did look a little dumb. Yeah. So the way that they did it in this movie to remove the blue skin but still make him Electro, very good decision, because a lot of people would have been like, well, he still looks fucking stupid. So he looked stupid for the first 5 minutes he was on screen when they were fighting him, until they blacked him out.
Right.
So that was cool. It was cool to see the lizard. I gotta say, the only CGI in this movie that I thought looked bad was in the Doctor Strange's, his cells.
Yeah.
The lizard in the cell. His face looks a little weird. It looks worse than it did 10 years ago in the original Amazing Spider-Man.
Yeah.
And although that could be because in the Amazing Spider-Man he was always moving and it was a little bit different and whatnot, but in those cells, the lizard's face did look a little bit weird. I was a little bit sad by that because I couldn't shake that feeling.
Right.
I couldn't just ignore it like I could a couple random other things.
Ned having the power to open up portals. That Doctor Strange was good in this movie.
Yes. I really liked the fight scene of Tom and Strange.
Yeah, and the fact that...
Dude, that fight scene was that was probably the best fight scene before, the entire end of the movie.
Yeah.
I just love that.
Do with Ned. Well, actually, he got his mind erased, so he doesn't even know that he can do portals now. But I wonder if they're going to come back to that.
That and Strange probably has the tool back. Because it wasn't Ned. It was the ring.
Yeah. Okay.
It was the ring. So I don't think Ned had the ring anymore.
But Strange seems surprised too. He's like, "Did you just open a portal?" And then he's like, "Yeah." And he's like, and then walks off. And I was just like, interesting.
Yeah.
But I think I've covered everything in this movie.
Yeah, it was so good.
It really was.
I can't say I was disappointed.
I wish we had more time. I could sit for a good 2 hours just listening to the three of them talk, like when they were on the statue.
Oh yes, talking. All of their interactions were so good. Well, in the science lab too. That was probably my favorite between them. So and they literally did the three cartoon Spider-Man pointing at each other meme, because that was a meme for forever. Yeah. For the last several years. Was them, and the artists would take that and adjust the suits to look like the respective actors' suits, so you could tell which one was Tom and which one was Andrew and which was Toby. They would all point at each other. They literally did that meme in this movie, and fuck yes.
This movie had a lot of memes in it.
Yes.
A lot of references to memes.
And like I said, I knew a lot of the references from the original trilogy because of the memes from the original trilogy.
Yeah, the original trilogy had so many fucking memes.
Yeah, it was so many. It was very campy in a way. But I don't know if we should go on much more, because we'll just, talk for 15 years about this.
About the same shit.
But yeah, like I said, this wasn't going to be one where we do notes or, go through all of the plot and everything like we have so far. This is just kind of a bonus episode. I wanted to talk about some of these things because it was so good. It's probably my favorite Spider-Man movie. Coming from someone who hasn't watched the original trilogy, but still.
Definitely my favorite, just having all three of them there and having all those villains.
It's so good.
But...
And as soon as I got home from the theater, I pre-ordered.
It made me like Tom Holland's Spider-Man a lot more because
he got an arc, dude.
At the end of the movie, his new suit, it looks like it was Spider-Man. He's no longer using Tony Stark's tech to have a suit, and it's an actual Spider-Man suit, and he's now finally Spider-Man. That's what made me like him in this movie.
Yes,
because the last two movies, I didn't hate him by any means, but I was just like, it still does not feel like Spider-Man.
Yeah, that was the thing that a lot of other people complained about with the past two Tom Holland movies, was because he's not Spider-Man, he's a kid, those kind of complaints. This movie, he grows up.
Yeah.
Because
and he is Spider-Man now.
Aunt May dies. He has his experience with the other two Spider-Men who lead him into to growing up, and him wanting to kill Willem, Green Goblin, and Toby not letting him. He just grew. He went from 1 to 10 on a scale of growing.
And that's what he
that's
needed.
That's what
I don't
he
know how
needed.
many more Spider-Man movies he would have been able to do without
Yeah,
having that.
and like we said, those first two Spider-Man movies, like I haven't seen Far From Home, but the first two, it's the consensus is they're more MCU than they are Spider-Man. They're just the MCU with Spider-Man.
And I mean, it's okay, but I'm glad that he's fine with Spider-Man. And
Tom Holland, his character got so much growth in this movie too that even without the other two Spider-Men, it meant a lot. But having Tobey and Andrew there to be kind of that background, like the hey, you're not the failure. We've had that too. Yeah. Especially Andrew, because you could argue that Gwen did die at his hands. And it was a nice touch that he saved MJ in a completely different way. He didn't web MJ.
Yeah, didn't web her, he went down.
He caught her and then webbed themselves up. Which was a very nice touch because it was, going about it a completely different way because, Gwen barely died, just her skull cracking against the ground. This is the second
MCU movie, technically, that has made me cry.
What was the first one?
Endgame.
Endgame was the one that made you cry? Okay.
Iron Man dying had me fucking...
Oh, true, because you're a big Iron Man guy.
Infinity War almost had me because everybody dying, when Thanos snapped his fingers, I was like, what the fuck are they going to do now? Because they just killed everybody off.
That didn't make me cry when I watched Infinity War. That just made me confused. I was like, well, what the fuck is their point to do now? I was upset that Tom died. But, he comes back just like everybody else does. But the thing was, I was like, oh...
it didn't make me fully cry because I was like, well, there's going to be a part 2 and they're going to probably bring everybody back.
So I didn't like Infinity War, to be honest, when I watched it the one time. And granted, I still haven't watched plenty of MCU.
I loved it for the fact that I saw it opening night, had no idea what I was walking into.
And that's fair. That's completely fair.
The shock that I had watching that.
Like, the spoilers that I've had for those two movies had no reference for me before I watched Infinity War and still haven't watched Endgame. But going in with nothing and having watched a lot of MCU before, those would have been more impactful. But I will just say, I didn't like Infinity War when I watched it. I just thought it was mediocre. It didn't mean much to me.
That's fair.
But going through all this, I hope that it'll mean more. But this will mostly wrap it up for this episode. Yeah. No Way Home was fantastic. I just had to talk about it a little bit.
I'm excited for Tom Holland's next Spider-Man movie. I'm hoping they introduce Miles Morales.
I'm excited to see what they do, especially
if they're going to do it, it'd be at the end of the Tom Holland's next movie. I feel like he'd have his first standalone movie as Spider-Man, and then maybe have
and they'll probably introduce Venom into that. Although that's going to be a little bit of a mixed bag because Tom Hardy's Venom is a very not controversial. It's very mixed.
Doesn't he play more like a hero in those Venom movies? I've seen the first one and it felt like he was more like a hero than a villain.
Maybe. I have no clue. All that I know is that a lot of people like Venom. Some people extremely dislike it. But then Venom 2 is you either love it or you hate it. And it's like half and half split. Like half of the people who watched Venom 2, Let There Be Carnage, loved it. The other half couldn't even get through it because it was so bad. So it's like...
Well, and it might not even be him playing it because that black goo is now wandering around. It might be just someone completely different.
They might choose somebody different, and the black goo just made it into the. We'll see what they do,
which is interesting. But yeah.
But I will say I hope that they make an Amazing Spider-Man 3. If Sony decides, hey, we can
of him not pulling back his punches anymore. I would like to see Andrew Garfield go down like a darker path before.
I don't know how I would feel about that, but it depends on where they would go. Like if they went back and got David Webb, who directed those first two movies, if they decided to go with the original story that they were going with, or if they took that and adapted it to fit more into what this movie showed or something like that. Yeah. Like all I know is that I would love to see Andrew be Spider-Man again because as Tom recently spoke out and was like, yeah, I love that Andrew's getting love now. I want him to get another movie since he didn't get all of them.
Right.
And I would love that.
It'd be cool. Yeah.
So I guess this will wrap it up for this episode. I don't want to go much longer. So thank you guys for watching. The next episode, I think, is just going to be us starting to rank some of our favorite games because I have to get some quick episodes out because of work-related stuff, which you'll see in the April State of Affairs.
I got one day off this week, so...
Yeah, so we have to record a bunch of other stuff tonight, too. But So this is the end of this episode. Come back again in 2 weeks, I guess, on the third Friday of March for our top 10 video games of all time. So we'll see you guys then. But for now, I'm Holden.
I'm Lane.
And this has been the Seasonal Podcast.